with that, what I'd like to do first is just turn it over to members on the team, and then we'll jump in. So let's start just by the way I see you, which is Thea. Would you mind introducing yourself?
Hey everyone, my name's Thea. I'm an energy fellow in the office. Nice to see you.
Great, thank you. Kristen.
Hi, I'm Kristen. I'm an intern in the office.
Thanks, Kristen. Julie.
Hi, I'm Julie Roth, and I've been working with the Office of Sustainability on rolling out a program called Solarize to incentivize bulk buys of residential solar.
Thanks, Julie. Elizabeth.
Hi, my name is Elizabeth, and I'm a resilience fellow in the office.
Galen.
Good afternoon. I'm Galen Hardy, and I'm your community engagement specialist.
Thanks, Galen. Simi.
Hi, everyone. I'm Simi. I am an intern in the office as well.
Josh.
Hi, all. Unfortunately, I don't have visuals, but my name's Josh MacDonald. I'm the energy coordinator for the city of Ann Arbor.
Christine.
Hi. I have no connection.
Christine is in the mayor's office, and she often helps us coordinate a lot of the logistics, so far more than that. So as you see, we are a pretty strong team. We have a lot of volunteers as part of this team, a lot of interns and folks who give their time very graciously to help us advance our work. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and just take some folks who aren't going to be answering questions and make them attendees. So bear with me for a second. Great. Well, again, thank you all for joining us today for this conversation. We are excited to have you. What the format for today is pretty simple. I am going to just walk through a little bit of contextual slides, and then we're going to jump into answering your questions. This is a very trying time, and we want to acknowledge that. So I'm going to just here quickly start. Thank you for allowing us to do this remotely. We know that it can be challenging, to say the least, to get technology to work the way that we want. So team, I'm going to ask just to confirm, can you all see my slide? I see some yeses. Okay. Well, again, thank you all so very much for joining us. Again, my name is Missy Stoltz, and I'm the head of the Office of Sustainability and Innovations in the city of Ann Arbor. And as you know, you are here joining us today because last Monday, or this Monday, we launched a living draft carbon neutrality plan that really outlines how the entire Ann Arbor community could achieve carbon neutrality by the year 2030. I just want to give, I think, 5 max slides here, walking through a little bit of context, and then we're going to jump into your questions. So for those who may not know, this work actually was mandated by City Council. So on November 4th of 2019, Ann Arbor City Council passed a resolution, and these are the resolved clauses of that resolution. I'm not going to read them to you, but what this resolution did is it declared a climate emergency in the city of Ann Arbor and globally. And when it declared a climate emergency, Council set the goal of achieving community-wide carbon neutrality by 2030. And then they asked the staff to do an intensive public engagement process and figure out how could we actually achieve that beautifully audacious, laudable goal in the time frame established. And they said we needed to present that plan back to City Council no later than March 31st of 2020. So we had to present this information to City Council by Tuesday of this week. And so what we did on Monday was we released the plan following this resolution. Now, I want to acknowledge this obviously was a resolution that was passed before the COVID-19 pandemic. It was also a resolution that Council did not change, which meant that we continued down the path of producing this plan. The plan also was actually done before the pandemic really struck locally. And so we had already finished, and we were kind of refining the plan itself, doing things like copy editing at the very end. So I want to acknowledge this is where the impetus for this work came from. And it also came from many of you on the line who have been working tirelessly to enhance the sustainability of our place. And so we want to thank you for that, but we thought it was important to start with the context of where this plan came from. And this plan and this initiative and everything associated with it, so not just the plan, but all of the activities and the support to implement those activities are framed under what we call A20. So A20 is our carbon neutrality planning and implementation initiative. So you'll see this around the community as we go forward. So the kind of last ground laying thing I want to put on the table is I think it would be disingenuous not to acknowledge the moment in time that we're in. We obviously are in the midst of a pandemic. We know this. We hear this all the time. This is an emergency moment too. We are having a public health crisis. I hope that all of you are safe. Obviously, we are doing this remotely because we need to be physically distancing ourselves. We don't need to be socially distancing, right? We need to actually see each other. We are inherently social beings. And so we thought about doing it in this format as a way to keep the conversation going while respecting this moment in time that we're all living through. We want to acknowledge that the COVID-19 pandemic necessitates our attention. It necessitates that we practice safety and that we think about others around us. And there are parallels in the moment that we're living through and with the idea of resilience. And this is something I've been thinking a lot about. Resilience is about how we improve and bounce forward, how we improve our relationship with our people and our place. And this is a moment, at least for me, of deep reflection about what it means to create a resilient community, what it means to be a resilient household, what it means to be nested in a resilient neighborhood. And so we're using this moment to think about how we increase the resilience of our people and our place to everything, including COVID-19. It's also a moment of reflection. I think for some of us, and I can't project onto all of you, but for some of us, this is a moment where we're questioning why we do things the way that we do things. And we're questioning as we see systems break or falter, or as we see disparate health outcomes. If you look at where the outbreak of COVID-19 is the largest in Michigan, we're facing an equity crisis. It's in our low-income minority communities that are having a disproportionate impact. To me, at least, that's raising a lot of questions of how did that happen and why is that happening? And this is true across a range of different conditions and impacts. And so this is a moment for us, at least, of deep thinking, reflection, and really wondering about how we can achieve the transformation that we need in many of our systems, because I would argue our systems aren't actually serving all of us well right now. And just like the climate, if any of you saw the climate presentation, we talked about how climate change is going to necessitate changes in all of our lives. Well, COVID-19 already is. And so I want to acknowledge that all of us are in a very different world than we were 3 weeks ago, that this is a remarkable moment. And we just want you to bring that reality to bear in this conversation. So we just want to acknowledge that the world feels different and probably is different than it was 3, 4, 5 weeks ago for us. So we authentically want to put that on the table, and you're going to hear me talk about this. We did get a few questions specifically making a connection between these 2 points, so you'll hear this again. And then lastly, I just want to talk to you a little bit about the format for today. Excuse me. So this is not a live Q&A session. We had tried very hard to make it a live Q&A session, and I'll tell you why not in a minute. That said, we are taking questions in real time through other venues. You can send an email to sustainability@a2gov.org, and we are, Galen is monitoring that website as questions come, or that email address as questions come in. And we may not be able to get to them all today, but we also have another session on April 8th where we can take those questions and respond to them then. If you happen to have the registration form that you signed up for, you can also submit questions on that form, and we'll be pulling those as well. If we don't get to your question today, we are doing a written Q&A. So even if you think of a question in 5 days, you can still submit those questions to us, and we're working on a living kind of question and answer FAQ, if you will, that we'll post on the website to answer the most common questions that we hear around carbon neutrality. Now, in terms of why it's not a live question and answer session, this is a little complicated, but I think it's worth putting out there. The basic answer is there is a lot of interest in this topic, and right now there are requirements around the Open Meetings Act, which is for our elected leaders, and beautifully, many of our elected leaders are interested in this topic, and a few indicated they would be joining us for the conversation today. Elected leaders aren't allowed to talk to one another or deliberate outside of public posted meetings. And so if we had a live Q&A, it would mean there would be a chance for folks to be able to talk back and forth, which would be a deliberation, and that's not allowed. And so the attorney's office asked us required us to make this not a live Q&A session in the traditional sense, so that we couldn't have deliberation back and forth. So that's the reason you can submit questions more in a one-way information flow through an email address or through the form, and we can then respond to them in that way. So it is not ideal. I want to acknowledge that. We do not like it. We would prefer an open Q&A, but we are living in remarkable times, and this is the way that we've been able to work around and continue to engage in this topic. So thank you for your patience. Thank you for understanding. And with that, just a quick reminder that the charge that we were given as a community was to figure out how we were going to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to zero by the year 2030. Our last inventory had us just over 2.1 million metric tons of carbon dioxide. And so our goal was to figure out how we were going to get that all the way down to zero. And we look at our emissions in different ways. We'll talk about this. If you've seen the presentation or read the plan, you've seen any of this information. This is just a little background about why we decided to frame the plan the way that we did. And this is the vision that's guiding us. So this is, I think, potentially one of the most important things for us, at least, is understanding the framing. And that was working together to create and implement a just transition to carbon neutrality by the year 2030. You can see the plan, if you haven't yet, at a20.org. It is living, it is draft, it is not designed yet. We're working on the design now. So what you really are seeing is the version that we're taking comments and making revisions on. In the plan, you can learn a lot more about the process that we undertook over the last 4 months to create the plan, the kind of public engagement and the partners that we've had. So please do take a look. So I'm going to assume most of you know this. These are the 7 overarching strategies. There are 44 actions that support these strategies that are a part of the plan. I'm putting this up for those who may not have had a chance to kind of take a peek or seen the presentation that we've given on the plan, just so you get a little bit of framing and grounding. And with that, we are now going to turn to your questions. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen so you can see the team. Great. All right, team. So let's go ahead and kick it off. The very first question, I'm going to turn it over to Josh. Can you perhaps share the question and then respond?
Yeah, sure. So there was a question as far as electrifying buildings, specifically around the costs and kind of the high cost to electrify a building and how it relates not only to the costs in general, but also how we plan to make it equitable for those who, kind of low income that might not, it might be harder for them to kind of electrify their buildings. And to answer this question, I think you can kind of break down the costs into 2 different parts. When we're talking about heat pumps, for example, there is a significant upfront capital cost to actually install the heat pump and make sure that you can electrify what normally would be natural gas. Maybe less so for like an electric stove range, but there are definitely those upfront costs, the capital costs. And then the second part is kind of the operational costs. And as we know, natural gas in Michigan is very inexpensive, and electricity is more expensive than natural gas. So there are costs associated with running and operating, a heat pump that are greater than if you had, for example, a natural gas furnace. So we've been thinking a lot about this question, and from the upfront capital cost side, we've been thinking about ways to do things like bulk buys, pairing, for example, a heat pump, which works on electricity, with something like solar panels to reduce the cost of the electricity. And then, just looking to kind of package these things together. We have right now, I'm not sure how much everyone's familiar with the Solarize program, but we have a Solarize program where we've been taking kind of solar panels, solar installers, bringing them to neighborhoods and having neighbors go ahead and purchase them in bulk, ultimately reducing the costs and getting savings out of doing it in bulk like that. So we could do something similar with the heat pumps and some of these more expensive, the expensive equipment that we need to kind of transfer over our buildings to all electricity. On the other side of that, there's also operational costs. And like I was saying earlier, electricity is more expensive than natural gas. So we've really been looking at ways of packaging together our heat pumps, maybe some of these bulk buys with energy efficiency upgrades that do actually reduce the costs, basically the energy use in the building. So I think those two sides together, we've really been cognizant of the cost, and we've been really trying to address those two issues.
Thanks, Josh. So the next question, and just so you know, we're reading through questions in the order in which we received them, is about animal agriculture. And I'm going to take this one. It says, we know that animal agriculture contributes a large percentage of greenhouse gases, and it contributes to climate change in other ways. And plant agriculture has a much smaller footprint. Without reducing our consumption of animal products, we will not be able to stop global warming. What is the city prepared to do to reduce our consumption of animal products? For example, making all city meetings and events plant-based and animal-free. It's a great question. This is in the plan itself. Excuse me, if you haven't seen this. So this particular action, I just want to start is the city's exploring limiting or eliminating the sale of animal-based products or certain animal-based products at city facilities, the exception being the farmer's market. We're also exploring a greenhouse gas emissions disclosure for different food products, which is kind of similar if you think to the calorie count that you might see at facilities, where it tells you, this is 240 calories and this is 500 calories. That way you could have potentially the opportunity to make a more informed choice about the greenhouse gas footprint of the things that you're consuming at the market. This is similar to what the University of Michigan does. So we're partnering with them to learn more about the methodology, how they track it. And again, this would be at city facilities itself. And then of course, at city events, we're looking to significantly reduce, if not eliminate, the sale of animal-based products or the serving of animal-based products. The next question, and I'm going to apologize, a lot of these did come over to me. Carbon neutrality has to be part of a global solution, as a city being wholly neutral doesn't solve the problem. So is there collaboration with other cities in the US or countries right now? It's an excellent question, and the answer is absolutely. We are highly networked. We're very, very lucky to be highly networked as a local government. We are networked through something called the Urban Sustainability Directors Network, where all of us, everyone that you see on the screen right now, we network with our peers from around the country. We share best practices. We take examples of policy or ordinances that others have implemented, and we take those and we contextualize them for Ann Arbor itself. We, as part of this planning process, we worked to both learn from our peers who have similar goals and initiatives. That's both domestic and international. And Kristen Hayden, who has since transitioned over to be an attendee, has been leading a lot of that work. She's also doing her undergraduate thesis on this topic, and so did a lot of the initial research about what other communities are doing around carbon neutrality. We took that work and we integrated it. We call our peers all of the time, and we also share our results and successes with others. So we don't just receive, we also give back to the community. So that's just one example of how we network. We're a member of multiple different networks of local governments, county governments, and others who are working aggressively on sustainability and climate action. So great question. The next question is, we mentioned that the University of Michigan needs to be involved. What about Ann Arbor Public Schools? So I want to take a second and say, if you've read the plan or if you've seen the presentation, we do an analysis that shows what the footprint looks like if the University of Michigan fully participates. We've also ran an analysis of what it looks like if the University of Michigan does not fully participate. And this is important because the University of Michigan is roughly a third of the greenhouse gas emissions within our community. So we obviously paid a lot of attention to those emissions. It is true, however, that the Ann Arbor Public Schools have to be a partner, and they are a partner, as it turns out. We have 66 partner organizations who stepped up to work with us on this plan and who have agreed to help work through implementation of the plan. And Ann Arbor Public Schools are one such partner. We need to continue exploring how, now that we've got the plan drafted, we're really going to work in depth on and collaborate in terms of implementing the solutions that are out there. This includes everything from the strategies you see in our plan, but also working with them as they're creating their master plan around the millage that just was passed and how sustainability gets fully integrated into that. So we continue to have discussions with them, and we're hoping to have a much deeper collaboration. We've started exploring that in earnest. To really sit at the table together and do co-design, co-finance, et cetera, across the board. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Galen for the next question.
So this is like a 7-part question. And it asks, what is being done in respect to incorporating the following practical ideas into work plans? The first one was the city stops burning unwanted undergrowth in parks and reduces mowing, returning to natural landscape. And here, to answer that question, the city of Ann Arbor has a wide range of different parks. Some of these are maintained as natural areas, while some are dedicated to other uses such as playing fields and court games, walking, picnicking, and just being outside. If we were to simply stop mowing the grass in some of these parks, they would soon be overrun with invasive shrubs, bushes, trees. In addition, we have found that some people they like to use these nature areas as recreation, and there are a large portion of people who use the parks that prefer the traditionally mowed grass. And that's the answer to that question. The second part of this question, they wanted to know why hasn't the city supercharged initiatives to recycle and promote home composting by providing composting barrels at a low negotiated price or provide a credit for buying one? And to answer that question, the city's draft solid waste resource management plans recommend several actions to expand recycling and composting in the city. One of the things they ask is providing year-round curbside collections for all residents, beginning franchise compost collection for businesses, providing curbside textile collection, and collecting construction and demolition debris data to inform a future waste ordinance, and also enhancing existing recycling enforcement efforts to ensure proper use of recycling containers. In conjunction with the county, so this is kind of long, in conjunction with the county, we're looking to increase access to household hazardous waste collection and electronic waste recycling. And moving forward, the city staff will also look to explore other options to expand recycling, composting to continuously improve these services. Second part of this question, and we have Dave in here. Dave, you want to take the portion where it says citizens agreement to stop using yard chemicals?
Yeah, I can comment on that a little bit, and I could also offer some comments on the previous question about
Thank you.
about burning. Regarding the chemicals, the city is we are working on an integrated pest management program. The city Parks Department has had an IPM program in place for some years, and we were asked recently by the Environmental Commission and City Council if we could help to do an outreach to the public to explain what we're doing, what that IPM is, what they could do to perhaps decrease the use of chemicals themselves. We're in the process, city staff are in the process of putting together some outreach materials, compiling things that we've already have existing, and putting together a communication plan to get those out to the public. And regarding the earlier question about burning and things, can you read that question again about burning?
Yes. They wanted to know why hasn't the city stopped burning unwanted undergrowth in parks and reduce mowing, and they're looking to return, I guess, those areas to a natural landscape.
Yeah, so there's several issues there that I could address. I don't want to take too long on it, but there's a couple misconceptions there. One is that if we just stop burning, things can go back to natural. And the reason that we are burning is to try to keep benefit the native vegetation. The whole issue with carbon is that it's not all the vegetation that's out there today, the leaves and branches and flowers and things are all things that every year die back and decompose. So the carbon issue is not the living plant material now. This is an issue of releasing carbon that's been stored in the soil for millions of years, releasing that into the atmosphere. So whether we burn off the dead vegetation or let it naturally decompose, it's going back up into the atmosphere. What we really want to try to do is to get the soil to sequester more of that carbon. And one of the ways to do that is to keep our native ecosystems healthy. There's been lots of studies that show that native ecosystems that are burned have better, stronger root systems and can sequester more carbon in the long run that way. So our burning is actually, we think, although there's an initial release of carbon that's pretty visible in the smoke, all that carbon is going back up anyhow as the plants decompose, and burning them is a way to keep those ecosystems healthy and help them sequester carbon more in the future.
All right, thank you. The fifth part of this question is why aren't citizens incentivizing growing home gardens and yards to produce? No, I'll read this again. They're looking for citizen incentives to grow home gardens. Well, under strategy 5 of the carbon neutrality plan, we encourage a plant-rich diet, which includes community gardens and public spaces, parks, homes, and schools. So that's something that, it's not explained, but that's something that's definitely in the plan. They're also asking about why hasn't the city invested in monitoring traffic light signaling sensors that optimizes traffic flow and decreases wait time at the light. In regards to the street lights and waiting times, this is addressed in section strategy 4, which is entitled Reducing the Miles We Travel in Our Vehicles by at least 50%. In the section Implement Non-Motorized Transportation Plan, which includes new infrastructure like street lights. So that's definitely in there as far as upgrading the street lights. The last part of this question was the city reduces frequency of recycling pickups to bi-weekly. Right now, proper recycling saves energy, it reduces greenhouse gas emissions, and prevents pollution by reducing the need to extract raw materials from products. The city of Ann Arbor is committed to making recycling easy for our community by following best practices, including weekly recycling collection and making recycling guides available online and through social media. Then also by following best practices like this, we can generate valuable recycling materials, achieve environmental benefits, and reduce contamination in our recycling stream. And currently, Ann Arbor doesn't have a plan to reduce the frequency of recycling collection from a weekly to bi-weekly schedule. And thank you for bearing with me on that long question.
Thank you, Galen. All right, so I've got a few that I am tasked with. Let me start. A question was about the projected timeline for implementation of each new item. And for that one, I would just say, please do take a look at the plan. We have a timeline for each individual action that you can see kind of when we're starting ramping up. Some of them necessitate policy work before we get into formal implementation, and you can see the timeline there. We're also working in the revised version or the updated version that's designed to have more aesthetically pleasing graphics that show the timeline. So please take a look at that. The next question I am going to read verbatim, and that is, why are you proposing spending $1 billion on questionable science during the middle of a pandemic? And so to that question, the response is twofold. One, I would argue the science of climate change is robust and sound. It is one of the most researched items that we have in society. We know that the climate is changing. We know that the impacts of climate change are already here and now. We experience them locally. We've already had a significant increase in the amount of precipitation that falls during the year, as well as the amount of rain that falls during individual events. We've experienced an increase in temperature, and you can see all of, I can happily on the Ann Arbor Sustainability website, you can see information about the changes that we've already experienced locally. And those changes are going to continue happening. And so to the first part, I would say the science of climate change is not questionable. To the second part, I would say to the beginning of this presentation, we were mandated to do this work starting in November. And the mandate was that we had to release this plan by March 31st. And there was no change to that mandate. And that is why you see this plan coming out now. So I'll stop there and happy to take that offline if folks have other questions. The next is a long question, and again, I'm going to put this in the Q&A that comes out after the FAQ that we generate because it is pretty detailed, but the essence of this is really an individual is curious to understand why the report assumes that adding things like duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes, accessory dwelling units will result in affordable housing. And they reference things like a huge and growing labor shortage across trades, or that labor in construction often gets prioritized to rebuilding in areas that have been hit by disasters, especially climate disasters. And as the climate continues to change, disasters are on the rise. And so what is that going to mean for the labor force in that space? And there are many more kind of layers to this question. It's a very good, thoughtful question. And so to this, getting kind of at the labor elements of the question itself, what we'd say is we're looking to partner with our labor unions. We already have, of our 66 partner, the Brotherhood of Electrical Laborers is one of our partners. And we're really trying to understand how we can partner with our labor unions, with our future workforce, with our at-risk kind of frontline populations, with our community colleges, and with others to develop a robust pipeline of individuals who are skilled and ready to work locally and regionally on the climate solutions that are outlined in this plan. Most of these actions are going to generate jobs. So we need to make sure that we have the workforce ready and skilled to do the work that's coming down the pipeline. Everything from our building trades, our electrical trades, across the board, we're going to need the workforce. So I would end by saying, if you have ideas about good programs that are up and running around the country, or if you individually are connected to folks who might want to help us advance this, this is a really critical foundational part of all of the work that we're looking to do. So please do follow up with us offline so we can advance that strategy. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Josh. The question for you, Josh: why isn't new construction for 2020 forward, both commercial and residential, required to be carbon neutral?
Yeah, so the plan actually does have a section that addresses this, specifically with adopting the newest building code, so 2021. And there was actually a question a little bit later on specifically about that building code. But the building code, if adopted, would allow us to basically ensure that all new construction, commercial and residential, actually would be carbon neutral. There's a piece of it specifically of the new building code that addresses carbon neutrality and basically reducing, just as the question says, reducing the upfront costs by ensuring that they're basically put in during construction versus being retrofitted in.
Thank you, Josh. Do you mind talking a little bit about why the city of Ann Arbor can't adopt a building code that's more aggressive than the state?
Yeah, so that's the next question that comes on. I think it might be my next question. It gets all into the building code side, and there's some questions specifically about the details. So I'll be going a little bit more into that detail.
Thank you. Galen, the next question you sort of answered in your initial remark, but can you maybe take a minute? We had a question about the public engagement process that we went through. Can you maybe talk a bit about that engagement process?
We went through definitely a robust public engagement process. You're talking about over 80 meetings with partners. We did like 3 surveys that we put out to the community, 2 town halls. And not only that, we sent out 11,000 flyers to, I want to say, was it K through 8 students in the Ann Arbor Public Schools. So we got out the word as best as we can, as best as we could. But you know, we need more. We need to make sure that residents are definitely understanding the terminology. You know, so that's ongoing. That's ensuring that we're reaching our block clubs, reaching people wherever they may be, you know, and making sure that they understand the terms and most importantly, touching our most vulnerable communities. Because I think Missy touched on it earlier as we look at the COVID-19, you know, making sure that our vulnerable communities are covered and that everything stays grounded in equity. You know, so that's one of the things that we're looking forward to. And like Missy said, this isn't just a one-off, you know, where we just do this and then we just leave it alone. As the document grows and, you know, it's a living document, there's going to be more engagement because as it changes and evolves, we need to make sure that the populace is informed of the changes and the things that we're expecting from the citizens of Ann Arbor and letting them know that we're leading by example, you know. So any questions that you have, if you ever want to reach out to us, please, ghardy@a2gov.org. If you need me to come out, talk to anybody, or just even have a one-on-one talk, so we're here for you. And we want to grow with you as the plan grows too. So
Thank you, Galen. The next question, why is the planning document not more comprehensive in detail for citizens to clearly understand what and how expected results will be measured? Good question. And this is kind of a perennial planning question. So the planning document was our public facing summary of the work that's been done to date. Of course, it's not designed, as I mentioned before, and that'll come soon to make it far more accessible and aesthetically pleasing, candidly, for folks. We also have summary sheets that we're working on right now that are for residents, renters, businesses, institutions that summarize what's in the plan, what it means for them. There are other products that are coming out that talk kind of at a high level, others that go much deeper, that help us move the plan forward. And then, I shouldn't say of course, but we have a lot of technical documents that are behind the scenes that's how we got to the final plan. And so those technical documents have a lot more of the granular detail about timelines and metrics and assumptions. And we've tried to portray that information in the plan that's public right now. Of course, if folks have specific recommendations for things that they want to see, we are happy to explore that. We've been thinking about a technical appendix as an option that summarizes in greater detail the information. The problem at the end of the day is one plan won't meet everyone's needs. And so we're trying to find a way that we create something that is accessible to the widest amount of people possible, and then has perhaps appendices that give the additional depth or information that others may want that not everyone is willing to access. So we appreciate the comment and are going to look at some technical appendices or some attachments perhaps that are linked to elsewhere to give some of that more specificity that exists. The next question, unfortunately, I'm sorry you're all hearing me speak, is for me, and that is, what will the impact of the coronavirus circumstance have for the city in terms of weighting possible changes to work plans? So it's pretty broad, and the answer is nearly all facets of our life are affected by COVID-19 and will continue to be affected. We are continually revising what we do as a city, how we do it, what we think about, based on the moment in time that we're in, and then the reverberations of the moment in time that we're in. For example, after this town hall or this question and answer session, we have a staff meeting to talk about resilience and how we're going to use this moment to really lay a foundation to increase resilience today, but also into the future. So some of the actions in the plan, can we jumpstart them right now? Because we're at a moment where people are thinking about the resilience of themselves and of their place. And so everything is affected by this moment in time. And I don't have specificity because we're not done. So I can't answer exactly what it's going to look like because I think we're all trying to be really nimble and agile and respond the best that we can. I am going to jump ahead. Thea, I'm going to go over to you. Can you tell us a little bit about what provisions, recommendations are being made to limit animal agriculture to abate greenhouse gas emissions?
Yeah, I'm also familiar with our greenhouse gas inventory, and so we actually don't have many emissions accounted for from animal agriculture because there's just not large-scale operations occurring within our city boundary. I also don't have a very strong background in animal agriculture. We also have a green belt to help stop growth that was put in back into the 2000s. I don't know if that gets at the question.
Thanks, Thea. You guys are all doing great. Thanks for sticking with us as we walk through this format. The next question broadly, again, apologies, the next few are for me. Strategy 4 is about reducing the vehicle miles we travel in our community by 50%. It is also, if you look at the math, the most expensive strategy. And so there was a question about kind of the framing of how, why that's so large, what that may mean, and if that actually could be used as a technique to not support the entire plan itself. And our response is that, at least from where we sit and our professional expertise, in many ways, transportation-related emissions are the hardest to tackle. That it is a lot easier for us to think about solutions that allow you to still power your home the way you power your home, where you just turn on the light and the power is there, but we're powering it with renewable energy. So it's very little impact to the individuals. But when we talk about transportation, we're talking about physical change, right? And that is really challenging for many of us. This strategy is not about switching your car to an electric car. That is included in this plan. That's in the electrification strategy. This is literally about reducing the miles that we travel. So it's about active transit and non-motorized transit. It is about public transit and expansion. And by default, what that means is that we are investing in infrastructure. We are investing in bike lanes, protected bike lanes. We are investing in ubiquitous sidewalks so you can walk where you need to go throughout the community. It's investing in changes in land use, which actually are not that expensive by themselves, kind of the policy changes. But if you have ubiquitous sidewalks, we want to make sure you can get somewhere that you want to go. But it's also about expanding our transit, adding more buses to the fleet, and that requires more mechanical work. It's about expanding service throughout our community. It's about things like bus rapid transit, so that when you get on a bus, you're moving expeditiously from point A to point B, and that necessitates infrastructure. So while it is true, this is an expensive component of the plan, what is going to happen, this is at least my projection, is we're going to see the emissions from stationary sources like electric and natural gas drop. And the pie, that circular pie that we showed of Ann Arbor's emissions, it's going to go from being primarily stationary to being almost all transportation related emissions. And so we're going to have to start working pretty immediately on reducing emissions from transportation, because it's going to take longer to actually achieve those kinds of changes. It's not just infrastructure, it's also then the physical behavior change associated with it. So it's complicated, but we think it's really, really an important element. Okay, I'm going to take the next two questions together. They're about funding sources. And then the second is about impact on taxes. So let me start with the funding sources component. We did 3 public surveys. The second public survey looked at one of the questions was looking at how we could fund this and what the appetite to pay was. And based on that input, we had over 1,000 respondents to that survey. We're looking at a mix of the following funding options. They're possible funding sources. Of course, we have to secure them, but it includes philanthropic dollars, state and federal dollars, especially if we adopt the plan. It becomes far more alluring for state and federal agencies to fund it, because we have a direction that we're heading, and so they can understand how those investments pour into values the community holds. We're looking at public-private partnerships. So how can we work with enterprises to do different kinds of financing? We are looking at innovative financing, things like green bonds or other ways to unlock the capital needed to do the work. And we are, very candidly looking at what it might mean to have some sort of carbon neutrality millage that would cover the rest, whatever we're not capable of securing. So to the second question about taxes, it's a great question and one that we don't have an answer for at the moment. If a millage were to be proposed, though, it would have to go to a public vote. So we have a ways to go before we get to that point. We have to do a lot more analysis. We have to do a lot more outreach. So there would certainly be a choice and a chance for everyone to weigh in before we move that direction, if we were going to move in that direction. Okay, I'm going to jump ahead to Thea. How can I measure my current carbon footprint?
Yeah, so there are 2 carbon footprint calculators I would recommend. One is the EPA carbon footprint calculator, and the other is the Cool Climate calculator from Berkeley. Both of those are going to be a lot more comprehensive of the sources of carbon that we are able to look at as a city at our community-wide inventory. It also, both of the calculators will let you look at the impact of making changes, both at the cost to you, the savings you'll see financially, and the savings you'll see in terms of your carbon footprint. Do you want me to address the second part of that question? We also were asked, how will these changes financially affect me? One, you could look at that specific calculator in terms of the costs you might need to put in to become more energy efficient, and the savings that you would see. In general, these improvements pay for themselves over the lifetime of owning a house. I can get into more detail. Most of the actions in the plan are incentivized and not required. And we're looking at organizing bulk buys to provide discounts on improvements for energy efficiency and electrification. We're looking at having a loan loss reserve to help out the people equitably making these transitions. I think one of the required actions, as Josh mentioned, is making changes to new construction, which is one of the most financially feasible ways to make a net zero ready house. Yeah, I'm not sure if anybody else has any more.
Thea, on that point, do you have the Rocky Mountain Institute figures handy or directionally that you could share the difference, like the incremental cost that they assessed for building a net zero?
Yeah, so the incremental cost of building a net zero ready house, which is a house that's highly efficient and all of its energy consumption can be offset with renewable energy, such as the CCA that we're recommending, it's only around $1,600 for our region, which is pretty minimal. For looking at a zero energy house, which is a house that makes or produces its own energy to offset its energy use, it's closer to $20,000, but that's not something that we're requiring. Certain people have values that align with wanting to have solar on their house, like wanting to be more resilient, wanting to know that they're offsetting their carbon. And so that's more of a personal choice.
Thank you, Thea. That's great.
Yeah.
And just to clarify, that is for new construction.
Correct.
Great. Raymond was going to join us, and I know he was pulled in the last minute, so he had a question for him about bus rapid transit. And the question is, bus rapid transit needs dedicated lanes. The DDA has spent a lot of time and money narrowing downtown streets. How is this going to impact the ability of bus rapid transit to perform? And the answer is it actually won't, because bus rapid transit and the dedicated lanes are really about our primary corridors that we're thinking about. So you could imagine places like Washtenaw or Plymouth would be the areas where the bus rapid transit system would have those dedicated lanes. As it came into the downtown, then it would kind of blend in, but really bus rapid transit is not about the downtown corridor. It gets you downtown or wherever it is kind of in that spider you're going, but it is really much more about moving rapidly along the primary transit corridors. So we don't have a conflict there. I'm going to skip ahead. Josh, do you want to take this one? I will soon need to replace my single home furnace. What is the best option for my home? I currently have natural gas. Suggestions? I'm going to unmute you, Josh.
Okay, there you go. Yep, I think I got it. Sorry about that. So the question had furnace, hot water heater, and a stovetop. So as far as stovetop goes, we have electric stovetops. There's also inductive stovetops. I think those are pretty spread out already. I mean, people already purchase those types of stovetops. As far as hot water heaters, there are basically heat pump hot water heaters that take the surrounding air, basically the temperature of the surrounding air. They're able to transfer the heat from the surrounding air into the hot water heater itself. And it just makes sense. So they're much more efficient than your conventional heat pump, your conventional furnace. And so a lot of times you can go ahead and do kind of this electric hot water heater with the heat pump integrated into it. And then finally, for a furnace, I think the focus is really on heat pumps. The only other alternative is geothermal, but unfortunately geothermal usually costs a lot of money, specifically to burrow the holes to be able to put down, because there's basically wells that you have to use. And so a lot of times people just don't have the space, and because it costs a lot more, we've been looking a lot more towards heat pumps. And for a very long time, I think heat pumps didn't really work necessarily in our climate. But I think as the technology has gotten better, we've seen more and more efficient heat pumps, to the point where now, even in cold winters in Michigan, you're able to run and operate a heat pump. And especially the most efficient heat pumps, you're even able to see better efficiency than even a natural gas a furnace. So
Thank you, Josh. And again, part of our work is distilling these things, this information out for public consumption. So as you're going to market to buy things, we have the information available for you. The next question, how is 820 working alongside small local businesses to utilize their direct connection to the community and influence over consumer behavior, as well as supporting them through the difficulties they're facing with the COVID-19 situation? So for this one, what I would say is in terms of planning for the plan that you now see, we have partners such as the Ann Arbor Ypsilanti Chamber of Commerce, the Main Street Association, the 2030 District, and we continue to partner with them, and we will continue to partner with them to implement solutions. One of which, as perhaps the most notable, is a Green Business Challenge that's highlighted in the plan. And that would be hopefully implemented in partnership with the 2030 District and would really focus on bringing incentives, education, awareness, some award and recognition programs to help our small businesses and our local businesses save energy, do energy efficiency work, water conservation work, access renewable energies, perhaps at more affordable rates through things like bulk buys, and then focus on enhancing their resilience. So both of them as an entity as well as the people that serve them. So the Green Business Challenge is sort of the framework under which we're hoping to really advance work in that space. It's a great question. Josh, this one is back to you about the building codes. So it's a big question. Some questions about updating the building code. There's a slew of things here. If you would like to quickly summarize kind of the questions and then jump in.
Yeah, sure. So to answer your question earlier, mostly about the building codes and just getting a little bit of background on that. So as far as the building code goes, the state basically mandates the building code, and as a municipality, we're not able to require anything that's more stringent than what the building code currently has. So one of the main focuses, both of the plan, and I think as I was talking earlier about, kind of updating the building code, is to adopt the 2021, so it's a IECC building code. There is an appendix to it, which is kind of a zero energy appendix. And if anyone's familiar with the zero code, so zero code is kind of associated with the 2030 district, but zero code, it basically codifies the zero code. So if people are interested, I know the question kind of gets into some granularity and details that I probably won't have time to get into too much now, but there is zerocode.org where people can look at more information as far as the zero code. And then that appendix in particular is on the New Buildings Institute, so newbuildings.org. Those are two really great resources to kind of see what's laid out. Kind of in general, it does affect both residential and commercial, all in an attempt to make sure that when the construction is happening, so for any new construction, a lot of the energy efficiency upgrades are put into the building. So that way, I'm kind of getting to a previous question, that way a lot of the costs are basically lower than if you had to kind of retrofit. So I think that's kind of the gist of, I hope I got most of it. It was kind of a large question. So if you guys want any more details though, those two resources, the newbuildings.org, and then again, that kind of zero code, both of those are really great to go check out.
Thank you, Josh. Thea, what role do carbon offsets play in achieving carbon neutrality, and what certification frameworks are being used to verify results?
Yeah, so in the proposed plan, we did our best effort to look at how could we actually achieve emissions reductions through actions, and then closing the gap for any emissions that we can achieve locally with carbon offsets. So that was our strategy. In terms of what types of offsets we're looking at, we are initially proposing carbon offsets that are additional. That means that they wouldn't have happened with our investment. They actually displace fossil fuels. So we're not just focusing on areas that have already a lot of wind power and adding even more wind power, and that are aligned with our equity and justice goals as we try to make this transition as equitably as possible.
Thank you, Thea. A question, will you require people to give up their gas-powered cars? The answer is no. We're not looking at a requirement such as that. Instead, we're looking at incentives. So how can we help people replace their vehicles if they need vehicles with an electric vehicle? Or how can we make public transit far more ubiquitous and accessible to people so that can be a viable option at least part of the time? So no, there's no requirement around gas-powered cars. Josh, how would you enable people to get rid of natural gas furnaces and other gas-powered machines like lawnmowers?
Yeah, so we've touched a little bit on this question, I think, in the last few questions that I answered. But we are looking at, for example, bulk buys to ensure that we can kind of reduce the costs by getting a whole bunch of residents to purchase in at once and get kind of those cost savings within the bulk buy. As Missy had addressed earlier, there's going to be a lot of material that'll be coming out of our office just to make sure that people have all the resources that they need. And kind of going through, making sure that we have good alternatives. So making sure everyone knows about the alternatives, the electric alternatives, and ensuring that, as much as we can get those prices down by doing kind of bundles, making sure energy efficiency is included with, if you're, for example, getting a heat pump, can we go ahead and do energy efficiency upgrades as well to your home? So that way you're not going to see as much energy usage as you kind of that spike in price. So I think bundling all these things together and really making a comprehensive upgrade to your home, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think we'll be putting out a lot more information about that.
Thank you, Josh. Last two questions to close us out, just looking at time. One is, how will community choice aggregation work in combination with distributed renewable energy resources? For those who don't know, community choice aggregation is effectively a program that would have to be enabled at the state, which we're actually very excited about, because if it is enabled at the state, it means every local government in the state could use it, which is one of the really important values we hold, is transferability. We don't want to just figure out how we achieve carbon neutrality in Ann Arbor in a way that limits the ability of anyone else to follow. So community choice aggregation would have to go to a vote of the public. And what it would do is ideally be an opt-out program. So you're automatically enrolled, and it would tell us and give us the ability to go to market and to buy new renewable energy for everyone in our community. So we would put requirements around what that would look like. So it could be new renewables, as Thea said, for the offsets, displacing fossil fuels, et cetera. And what we've seen, community choice aggregation programs exist in many states. They exist in Ohio, in Illinois, in California, and Massachusetts. Generally, what happens in a community choice aggregation program is you have cost parity. Sometimes you even have cheaper electric rates than what you have through your investor-owned utility, because you're buying in such great bulk. So we are proposing that as the largest strategy that we have, because it might actually not cost us anything to be able to do that other than staffing to manage that program. But we also want to maximize the amount of renewable energy that we have locally. So we are proposing in the plan scaling distributed resources locally, doing as much rooftop solar, as much commercial solar, doing a landfill solar project, community solar as well. So we maximize what we generate locally, and then the rest would go through a CCA program. So what we can't generate locally, which candidly, we can't generate the majority of our usage locally. We just don't have enough space to do that, but we can generate quite a lot. So we want to maximize that generation. The last question to end with is, how can the community best support your efforts in an ongoing way? And the answer to that is, thank you for the question. Talk to your friends, your family, your colleagues about this work, about what it means to you and how to get engaged. And when you're ready, join us as an ambassador. We are working to set up a neighborhood ambassador program, a youth ambassador program, and we basically need lots of people from lots of different walks of life to help us do this work. We need help implementing the solution. So if you represent an organization and want to be a partner in doing any of this work, we're ready to work with you. This is definitely an all hands on deck experience, a plan. It's going to need all of us to achieve it, and we're excited to work with everyone. So thank you for the sincerity of that question. And with that, I know we're at time, so I want to thank each and every one of you for joining us for this call. I know this was hard doing it in this format. We thank you. Almost all of you stuck with us the whole time. We appreciate it. Just to close out, if we do have a handful of questions we did not get to, what we're going to do, we'll be back on the 8th on Wednesday at 2 o'clock, and we'll continue working through questions. We'll also do our written document for the questions that we don't get to, as well as the ones we did. So please do submit any other questions that you have to sustainability@a2gov.org or on the registration page that you use to sign up for this webinar. With that, I want to thank you all for the work that you do and for joining us today. We hope you stay safe, enjoy the sunshine. It looks pretty glorious out there, and practice your physical distancing, but stay social, say hi to someone today. So thanks everyone, take care.